The interrogation room was quiet. Cold white light reflected off the metal table, and a small recorder blinked red, capturing everything. Across the table sat a 16-year-old boy. His name was Ethan Cole. On paper, Ethan was exactly the kind of kid no one would ever expect to see in a place like this. Straight A student, respectful, quiet. The kind of teenager teachers described as having a bright future. But tonight, that image didn't match reality, because in front of him, sealed inside a plastic evidence bag, was a controlled substance he had been caught carrying. Detective Ryan Miller entered the room calmly. He had done this hundreds of times before, but something about Ethan was different. He didn't look like a criminal. He didn't act like one either, which made this case more dangerous than it seemed. Before asking anything, the detective followed procedure. He read Ethan his rights: the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, the understanding that anything he said could be used against him. Ethan listened, then quietly agreed to talk. That was the moment everything began. At first, the answers were short, careful. Ethan admitted the substance was his, but when asked where it came from, he hesitated. He said it was from a friend. Nothing more, no name, no details, just silence. The detective didn't rush. Instead, he used something more powerful than pressure. Silence. Long, uncomfortable silence. Because in interrogation rooms, silence has weight. And eventually, people try to fill it. That's when the first real detail came out. Ethan had been using for 8 months. 8 months. At just 16 years old. That didn't match his profile. So the detective shifted approach. He pulled out Ethan's school records, perfect grades, no behavioral issues, teachers describing him as disciplined, focused, kind. But recently, everything had changed. Reports showed a different version of Ethan. Aggressive, short-tempered, distant. A complete shift in personality. When asked about it, Ethan resisted. He claimed nothing had happened, but experienced investigators know something important. People don't change that drastically without a reason. So, the detective changed tactics again. This time, his voice softened. Less authority, more understanding. Because sometimes the fastest way to the truth is not force, but empathy. He asked a simple question. What happened? At first, nothing. Just silence. But then, Ethan finally spoke. His father had left. No warning, no explanation. One day he was there. The next day he was gone. For Ethan, that moment changed everything. The house felt empty. Not just physically, but emotionally. That's when another person entered his life. A friend. Someone who seemed to understand. Someone who offered a way out. The friend told him it would help him forget, help him feel less. And at first, it did. But like most things that seem like an escape, it came with a cost. Ethan began losing control. His focus disappeared. His temper changed. He became someone even he didn't recognize anymore. The same people who once saw him as perfect now saw a completely different person. And yet, this wasn't a story about a bad kid. It was a story about a broken moment. As the interrogation continued, the walls came down. Ethan admitted he couldn't stop anymore. What started as an escape had turned into something stronger. Addiction. For the first time, his voice changed. It wasn't defensive anymore. It was honest. That's when the detective leaned forward and said something important. Not as an officer, but as a human being. This is the moment your life can change. Because in cases like this, there are always two paths. One where silence leads to consequences, and another where truth opens a chance to fix what's broken. Ethan looked up. For the first time, not with fear, but with something else. Hope. And then he made a decision. He would tell everything. Musica sekin kotari ladi. Some people think crime stories are about criminals, but sometimes they're about choices. One bad decision, one wrong influence, one moment of weakness, and how quickly everything can change. But also, how one conversation can change it back.
Not aggressive, just honest. You're still young, but this path, it doesn't stay small. Ethan nodded slowly. He knew, for the first time in the entire interrogation, he truly understood where he was and where he could end up. The room fell silent again, but this time, it wasn't heavy, it was different, it was clarity. And in that moment, Ethan made another decision. Not just to talk, but to stop running from the truth. The truth had been told, not all at once, but piece by piece. By the time Ethan finished speaking, the room felt different. What started as a simple possession case was now something much deeper. Not just a teenager with drugs, but a teenager pulled into something bigger than himself. Detective Miller sat quietly for a moment, reviewing everything in his head, every word, every pause. Because now, this wasn't just about understanding Ethan, it was about what happens next. And in the system, what happens next matters more than anything. Ethan sat across from him, still, silent, but no longer hiding. For the first time that night, he looked like what he really was. Not a criminal, a kid. One who made a series of bad decisions and ended up somewhere he never thought he would be. "All right," Detective Miller finally said, his voice calm, measured. "Here's where we are." He explained it clearly. No confusion, no sugarcoating. Possession of a controlled substance, admission of use. And now, involvement in distribution, even if it was only once. In the legal system, that changes everything. Ethan listened carefully, every word landing heavier than the last, because now, this wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was reality. "Because you're a minor," the detective continued, "this will likely go through juvenile court." That word mattered. Juvenile. It meant there was still a chance for rehabilitation, a chance to correct the path, but it wasn't guaranteed. If the court believes you're cooperative, if they believe this was influence, not intent, then you have options. Ethan looked up. "What kind of options?" he asked quietly. The detective leaned back slightly. "Rehab programs, mandatory counseling, probation instead of detention." For the first time, something changed in Ethan's expression. Not fear, relief, but only for a second, because the detective wasn't finished. "But if this continues," he added, his voice firmer now, "if you go back to the same people, the same habits," he didn't need to finish the sentence. Ethan understood. That path was darker, longer, harder to come back from. The room fell silent again, but this time, it wasn't pressure, it was weight, the weight of choice. Ethan stared at the table, then slowly nodded. "I don't want this," he said. Simple words, but real ones. Detective Miller studied him for a moment, not judging, not rushing, just observing. Because after years of doing this job, he had learned something important. Not everyone who says they want to change actually will, but some do. And sometimes you can see the difference. The detective stood up slowly. "This isn't the end," he said. "It's the point where you decide what comes next." Ethan didn't respond, but he didn't need to, because for the first time that night, his silence meant something different. Not resistance, but understanding. Sahana Osgaradi. Narration Davom Etadi. The case moved forward. Reports were filed, statements were recorded, And everything Ethan said became part of the process. Tyler's name didn't disappear. In fact, it became the center of a larger investigation, because people like Tyler don't operate alone. And cases like this rarely end with just one person. Musica biros kuchayari. Ethan's situation, however, took a different path. Because of his cooperation, because he spoke, because he told the truth. The court saw something important, not just what he had done, but why. And in the justice system, that distinction matters. He wasn't sent away, not to detention, not to a correctional facility. Instead, he was given another chance, mandatory rehabilitation, counseling, strict probation, conditions that would shape his next years. Not easy, not impossible. Toza. And for someone like Ethan, that difference meant everything. Months later, things began to change, slowly. Recovery isn't instant, it doesn't happen overnight. But step by step, he started finding something he had lost. Control. Not over everything, but over himself. Musica yumshadi. Some people look at stories like this and only see the mistake, the drugs, the arrest, the interrogation. But that's not the full picture. Because sometimes the most important part of the story is what happens after. Ethan made mistakes, real ones, serious ones. But he also did something many don't. He stopped. He faced it. And he chose differently. Because in the end, this wasn't just a story about crime. It was a story about choice and how quickly a life can change in either direction.